Thanks, Kieran. So for those that don't know me, I am Vicki Hughes, and I run a communications and PR consultancy called FUGU. So I started about 25 years ago in the very traditional PR media relations world, working for quite a large comms PR agency in Knightsbridge, which is now part of Omnicom, one of the biggest sort of global networks, before moving to Brighton, 20 years ago, joining another agency, and then setting up FUGU about 10 years ago. So my world is communications, and very much coming from that sort of PR media narrative driven background has really helped me as the world of comms and the technology has changed massively. Obviously, it's a very different world now. It's very two-way and interactive, and the digital platforms in which we're used to receiving messages are probably the much more primary way of getting information nowadays. So the agency that the FUGU business that I run is very much crossing the divide across different platforms. We do still do traditional media relations, traditional PR work, but actually it's much more about creating those stories, those narratives, and creating that content that is appropriate for our clients, and in order for them to reach their audiences, be they a consumer audience or a business audience. So that's a little background about FUGU, and we're based in Brighton, and I love being based in Brighton. I feel very lucky to be here. So in terms of how I am approaching the next 25 minutes, I've tried to find out from Kieran some of the queries and questions that you might have and things that you need in terms of how to communicate in this unprecedented time that has been way overly used as a phrase. And I think the amount of times people have written in emails, in these strange times, in unprecedented times, not seen before, never experienced, and then having to stop ourselves, keep rewriting that. So we are in a very different time, which means that we do need to communicate and understand what our audiences are going through and adapt accordingly. So I will start off with effectively a very short, quick run through of, what are the kind of key guiding good communication principles in terms of communicating with your audiences. Then a little bit about how you develop your story and your narrative, and then honing in on the two audiences that seem to be most relevant and of interest and people have been asking about how do you talk to your customers and your clients in this time, and also how do you talk to your employees. I don't know how many of you have staff. Actually, it might be quite useful. Maybe put a wave of hand if you have staff that you're interested in, need to talk to, or need some advice as well. Or is it mostly clients and communicating with your audience, your clients, that you're most focused on, perhaps? Okay. So then basically talking about those two audiences and hopefully providing you with some tips, guidance, advice in terms of helping you communicate at this strange time. So first of all, communication principles. I think it's really important before you share any newsletter, any email, any news story, that you absolutely have refined and are remembering what is the purpose of what you're doing? What is your guiding purpose of the business that you're running, of the service that you're providing? And everything that you do, everything you communicate should go back to that original purpose. And that original purpose will help you define your values, and all of your decision-making process about what you do and you don't write, and how you share and how you don't share, and everything from your financial business decisions as well should support those values and your original purpose. So I think it's all really important to keep going back to that each time. I know I certainly do when I'm running FUGU, and one of our guiding principles and our purpose is to add positive value in everything that we do, in the way that we work with suppliers, in the sort of businesses and clients we want to work with, and in terms of adding positive impact into our community as well. So I think just keep going back to that. That will then enable you to develop your narratives and create your stories. So yes, very much coming back to that every time. In terms of your narratives and your story, so it could be how your business has adapted and pivoted at this time. Your stories could be around what you're doing to support your community, about how your services are changing. There are probably some sort of useful tips and advice around that. So one thing I would say in this, obviously, crisis that we're not in the middle of, hopefully coming through to the end of, is to first of all review all of those plans and stories that you may have had in the bag ready to go at this time. Clearly, and certainly with a lot of our clients, a lot of that is just not appropriate and it is not relevant now. So your business may have had to adapt. It may just be inappropriate in terms of sharing stories around what's happening in terms of travel and in terms of being outside, because obviously you've got to be aware of what your audience is doing and can and can't do. So first of all, review your plans and make sure what you're sending out is still appropriate in this world. In terms of how you write any content, how you share any content in a video or through a podcast, in whichever format, I think it's really important in these times to be empathetic. So, you know, to show that you're understanding what your audience is going through. You cannot ignore it. Everybody's lives are very different. You know, every minute of every day is slightly different at this moment in time. But also, I would suggest to be not overly sentimental. I know that I've seen a few things that have come through and they're just a bit, I think especially you're thinking about your audience, but to a British audience, sometimes it can be seen as a bit icky and a bit too much and a bit almost maximising the opportunity. And we don't need that. I think we're all going through so many emotions and experiences and we have to learn so much and change so much that you don't need that. So I think getting that tone is really important. I think I had quite an interesting one that I thought got the tone quite right from a water company called One Water. It's an ethical water company. And they started off their newsletter something around the lines of where to begin. Don't know how to begin. What can we be saying? Because that's where people are at. But at the same point, it's you don't want to be repeating what everybody else is saying as well. So getting the tone right is absolutely right. Also, it's important not to be, I would suggest, you know, you don't want to be seen as being opportunistic. Hi, Emily, how are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
Good. I think Kieran was going to ask if people could turn their mics off just for the duration, if that's okay. Just for the sound quality. Thank you. So we're just going back to how to develop your narratives and your story. The mute button's at the bottom. If you sort of hover around the bottom, it should come up there. So in terms of your narratives, first of all, have empathy. Don't be overly sentimental to help you get that tone right. But also, you don't want to be seen as profiteering. You don't want to be overly opportunistic. I think some businesses have sort of jumped on a bit of a bandwagon and it's a bit too much. I think you need to be quite careful in the way that can be shared. I think you certainly could be, if you've pivoted and have changed your business to support your audience, or you're using your platforms and your service to give something back, be it a good local example, buy some beer. There, you know, you can pay it forward and enable some beers to be bought for the NHS workers. I'm buying grocery boxes from a local supplier, and you can pay it forward so that one of those boxes is given to a family in need. I think definitely, you know, in terms of supporting your community and reinforcing your values and the purpose of your business, share that as well. If you're doing something positive in this situation, do share it, but don't be seen as profiteering. You certainly need to be consistent in all your messages. So keep driving back to what it is you're doing, what is your purpose, what are your values, and how are you helping your audiences. And I think you can be optimistic as well. You know, people need good news. I know certainly the journalists that we're speaking to on the media work that we're delivering for clients, they're screaming for good news stories. Generally, a product launch is not seen of any interest at all, and quite often good news stories are not of interest. The news generally likes bad news stories, but actually at this moment in time, they are crying out for some positive, optimistic, happy news. So share that with your customers, with your audience, where you think it's appropriate, and where you're actually giving them some useful information. And as I said, I think it's also in terms of that, you know, being guided by the values and the purpose of your organisation in all that you're sharing is absolutely relevant. I think it's possibly worth sharing a bit of a talk around maybe e-newsletters, because I know, Kieran, you said that was something that sort of some of the members were asking around as well. And again, you know, it's important to keep in touch with your customers and clients. You know, don't go completely dark and quiet. You need to maintain a relationship, but equally you need to get that right. So give it careful consideration and make sure what you're sharing does actually add some value. You're giving them some important information. Just another for the sake of another email, I think you're likely to will not be seen in a crowded, busy inbox, and you could actually put people off. I think people are going to remember decisions that businesses are making in this difficult time because our emotions are that much more heightened as well. So you've got to get that right. So yes, if you are sharing meaningful, important, useful information, keep getting it out there, but don't do it just for the sake of it. I know, for example, somebody was sharing, somebody said to me recently, they're getting so many messages from so many brands in their inbox, but the one that they're not getting it from is from the travel company, from a holiday they've got booked and paid for in a couple of weeks' time. So, you can't be silent either if people are expecting something from you. You've got to get that right. So you've got to be shown that you're aware of the issues your audience is going through, but not just sending out guff for the sake of it. Make sure you're adding some value. So yeah, that's the kind of developing your narratives and story. Do communicate with your clients. I know somebody was asking about what do you say? Can we pitch to clients at the moment? Can we be seeking new business? Should we be quiet? I think going back to the principles I said earlier again, yes, you can. I mean, obviously, we all need to, we're all trying to strive for our businesses and organisations to survive in this difficult, unprecedented times, a word we've all far overused. And I think at the moment, retaining clients is probably our number one motivating factor. I think for the majority of businesses, new acquisition of new clients is probably slightly further down. It's doing, certainly from our business's point of view for FUGU, delivering absolutely fantastic service above and beyond the normal above and beyond that we would normally do is the way that we are certainly dealing with it. So looking after your existing clients, keeping them up to date and being, I would always say, absolutely honest with the situation that you're in. You do need to have that empathy. You can't be tone deaf to the world that's out there. You need to be sensitive. I would say that it's probably not appropriate for the hard sell at the moment. A few hard sell calls have come through to me. I've got the phones diverted to my mobile number. And every now and again, I do get a utility company or a phone company that gets through. And it's just not appropriate at the moment. I think there's other bigger things that we need to be worrying about. So not the hard sell cold calling is less appropriate for most businesses, I would suggest. But definitely thinking about building on those existing client relationships that you've got and looking after them perfectly well. And I would also say, there is a touch of optimism out there. Budgets are being reallocated. People are spending. Like most businesses, we're losing some clients and some projects, or things are being pushed into the long grass slightly. It is difficult, but then other new unexpected projects coming through. For example, we have a client that spends a lot on events and going to big exhibitions every year. They're now not going, and they've got some of that money back, and they want to spend that in a different way of marketing. They want to do more digital marketing, more online webinars and educational sessions. And actually, some of them want more content. Quite frankly, they need more content to share with the audience who they've engaged with, who were going to physically come to the event. So there is space for optimism, and there is space for building and organically growing those existing clients. So have a real think about, this is less comms, this is more probably business development, but have a think about how you can grow existing clients and existing relationships. But how you communicate with them, again, it's just being mindful and thoughtful of the situation that they're in and offering added value and added services and support that you think, from your understanding, they will need. And another word that I think is quite important is, along with empathy, is authentic. I think we're all human beings. We're all going through this together. We've all got families and all the other concerns that go with it. I think it's quite important that you can be open and honest with your clients. I think somebody might have asked the question, or Kieran, we talked about the fact that should you let a client know if your project timeline is having to change? Suddenly you may be homeschooling a couple of young children and you've promised to get something delivered in 2 weeks' time, and that's now physically not possible, especially if you're a freelancer. I would suggest honesty is always the best policy, and most people are understanding at this moment in time, and if not, you can usually find a way around it. So don't ignore the situation that you're in, that clients are in. Certainly don't ignore it to a fact where you may not deliver. You've got to manage their expectations. And that is a phrase that I've used in every agency in all of my life, and I was taught very early on, is managing expectations. Don't promise something you can't deliver. Something you could have been able to deliver 2 months ago in the old world may be impossible for you to deliver now in this new world that is reshaping the way in which we are existing. So share it, be honest, give them plenty of time. And I would say, from my experience, most clients are pretty understanding. So can you pitch? Yes. Should you be honest? Absolutely. Yep, I think so. Whilst finding solutions to the issues that your clients are offering you. How often should you communicate with your clients? I would suggest it's tailored to who your audience is. So it's thinking about their situation, what do they need from you? So definitely don't disappear and be non-existent, but equally don't be over the top and hassling them because they have all of their own demands and deadlines to meet. But yes, make sure it's at a regular pace that you know will work for them. Tailoring it to your audience is really important. And where and how should you communicate with that customer base? I would suggest absolutely with the existing channels that you've got. So whether that is through, these sort of your existing networks, like Wide Sussex, for example, and these kind of webinars, but also through your social media channels, obviously. If you do, if newsletters and emails are the good way forward, continue using those. We have Slack channels with some of our clients, so that's the way that we communicate with some of our sort of, more demanding and reactive clients. So I'd say, definitely maintain communications on those channels with your clients. So that's a little bit about focusing on the client side. I was just going to spend a few minutes talking about employees, because it is, whether you're a comms person providing consultancy support for organisations, as we do, and how they communicate with their employees, or whether it's your own staff. Again, communication is absolutely vital. And again, personally, with my team, I had to rethink how we communicate, because we're used to being in a space together. So we very quickly got used to virtually working. That wasn't a problem. Our business is, was set up in the cloud in the early .com days. But I had to spend quite a bit of time thinking about, what do you say, and how much do you say, and how much do you give away, and how honest should you be, or how much should you hide back? So first of all, maybe what should you say at this time? I would most definitely say, and all of my comms colleagues, I think, would agree with me, don't leave massive vacuums and gaps, because people will fill it with their own assumption of the situation, which could be wrong. And I think people's minds worry way more, and will add 2 and 2 together and come up with a much worse scenario than they're actually facing. Everybody's reading in the papers about the number of people that are being made, losing their jobs and redundancies. And what was the awful figure today? The worst recession and the worst economic impact for 300 years. I mean, we're all looking at those kind of facts and figures, and it's impacting us all. So we need to treat our employees, our staff, as adults, as human beings, and be aware that they are picking up lots of information, and don't let them fill in those gaps. Don't let them worry more than they need to. And also, don't expect them to empathise with your situation. An interesting note I thought earlier, actually, it's a bit like being a parent. You can't actually understand and empathise what it's like to be a parent until you are one. And you think, oh my God, what did I put my parents through? It's a bit like being a business owner. I don't think anybody could understand what it feels like until you've been through it. So don't expect sympathy and support in that way. Think it's a very different headspace to be in. So in terms of talking to your staff, you need to talk to them regularly. Regularly might be daily for some organisations, certainly at least weekly. Don't let them fill in the gaps themselves. But also, you don't need to have all the answers. Everyone knows. I think as long as, again, you're authentic, you're genuine, you're honest about what you're going through, and what the decisions have been made as they're being made. I think you just need to react and answer things quite quickly. And be able to, and also be very realistic. I think, pretending that everything's fine and we're all going to be okay, people can see through that. You need to be realistic, honest, without putting, the fear of God into everybody you're speaking to as well. So certainly from our perspective, I've tried to, from day one, tell the team what visibility looks like, share the good and the bad news that's coming through, but also trying to balance it with a bit of good news as well, because there usually is a piece of good news as well as a piece of bad news. And share that and share that optimism. And every time we have these kind of, team gatherings, is make sure that you're, again, going back to what I said at the very beginning of this, your purpose. Why are you doing this? Why have you set up this organization? That's why you've made these decisions around adapting to this current situation. And also be mindful of the differences of your staff, of their different needs. Again, I think somebody with a family and children will have a very different experience to people without children at home. Single parents will obviously have a very different experience probably to where there's more than one parent in the home. And it's being a bit mindful of the impact of that on different people within the organisation as well, and trying to support them as much as you can. So yes, so what do you say? I think you do need to share important information quickly as it happens. But I think you also need to give room for them to ask questions. And I think you need to be honest with what your answers are. But as I say, you don't need to have every answer for everything constantly. People understand that things are changing and we can't all plan for, because none of us would ever have imagined we've been in this situation. And how often should you do it? How regularly should you have meetings? Again, depends on your team and what you're used to. But as I said, I think weekly is probably, a minimum kind of recommended piece. Apparently, there was an article in The Drum recently, a marketing title, said something like 63% of employees want an update from their organisation every day. So people want lots of information. But adapt it to what your staffing are wanting, but keep that open dialogue. Be true to yourself, be true to your values, and answer those questions. And for larger organisations, it might be the first time that a CEO is doing like a live video conference. So again, it's being human through this. I think that's really important. I think it's also important to allow a bit of room at the end of these kind of meetups, and just generally to allow room for chatter and collaboration. I think that's what a lot of people are missing, just being in an office and those water cooler moments and just chatting about, the latest Netflix series. I think it's important that you allow space for that. Again, at my personal example is we're having meetups every week at the end of the last day of the week, a bit earlier. Everyone has a glass or something or a cup of tea, sitting in the garden, and we're playing pub quiz games, and we're just sharing what we want to do because we want to have fun together. And I think it's important that kind of human contact is built into your strategy as well. And also think about your Slack channels if you're using Slack. We've set up a working at home joys one, so people are sharing pictures of the puppy next door from their window. Everybody's growing lettuces and tomatoes, so we're all sharing images of that as well. So allow a bit of room for that nice, that's the reason, that's the joy people get out of working in certain organisations. You might have a Slack channel like working from home parents club, so people can share and exchange tips and ideas. So allow that to happen, make space for that. And don't forget any staff that you may have furloughed as well in this. So, you need to make sure you're engaging with them regularly. Clearly, they're not allowed to do any work for you, but it's important that they are kept up to date with the changes in the organisation, with the good news that's coming through, with the changes that are coming through as well. So invite those to the sort of more social meetups, invite them to some of your kind of company sessions, and invite them to ask questions if they've got any as well. And again, be realistic, open and honest with them. Don't promise that there'll be something available for them at the end if it's not necessarily guaranteed. And again, most people are aware of the situation they could find themselves in, because they'll be talking to friends and other people in other organisations as well. And I guess to sort of wrap things up, really, I think it's also really important you're trying to be kind to your clients and understand them. Be kind to your audiences and your customers and look after them. Being kind to your staff. Don't forget to be kind to yourself. You're not going to be of use to anybody if you experience burnout, if you're too exhausted, if you're too, run down. Everybody's saying it at the moment, but I think it's absolutely crucial to give yourself a little bit of space outside in the sunshine. If you can get out, it's important to, read books and open your mind and help you also process this strange world that we're in and the information and the different future that we're potentially facing. So give yourself space and time, be it exercise, yoga, reading, walking, drinking, whatever it is, and contact. So yeah, that's kind of how I want to leave it. And hopefully you've found that useful, interesting, relevant, and interesting. I've got other tips and resources and so on as well here as well, but I'm aware it is now 3 o'clock and I do not want to go over time and make space for questions.